Doom Eternal was a fantastic game. It took the mindless nature of the 2016 entry and gave you far more options on how to handle a combat scenario, with the inclusion of the Flame Belch, Ice Bomb, Chainsaw and Glory Kills. This allowed the combat loop to have an amazing flow where the pace never slowed down. After the release of Doom Eternal last year, Doom Eternal released its first DLC, Ancient Gods Part 1. Part 1 was a surprisingly difficult experience. Literally in the first encounter you were fighting Hellbears and Tyrants at the same time, and how they would use certain demon combinations to make the combat encounter that much more difficult. Unfortunately, where the DLC faltered was in its boss design, where most of the fight is just a sea of frustration. And now, here we are, a few months later with the epic conclusion Ancient Gods Part 2. So how is it? Well, let's get into it. When it came to the story, Doom 2016 put the story in the background and allowed the gameplay to take center stage. Now that doesn't mean the story was bad, but they knew the reason people came to Doom was for this, and this, and finally, this. And Doom Eternal continued that process, but the story grew in complexity with things like the Maker Race and the Night Sentinels. It gave Doom a far more deep and involved storyline that you could get invested in, although I wish there were more ways to access this story. Maybe an app, like Destiny did, would give me more incentive to read this lore. But how is the conclusion to this iteration of Doom? It's alright. The final encounter is a huge battle on the scale of Endgame with giant armies clashing and the fate of the universe at stake. The finale is filled with details you can miss in the background, like a dragon fighting a demon and a giant mech fighting another. It really amps up the stakes because you know if you don't win here, it's all over. Part 2 takes place directly after Part 1. After the Slayer released the Dark Lord's Life Sphere, it was revealed that the Lord of Hell is actually a copy of the Doomslayer, or the Doomslayer is the Dark Lord, or vice versa. Am I the Dark Lord? Are you the Dark Lord? Is this Taco the Dark Lord that's been out in the sun too long? Is this the Dark Lord? Are you the Dark Lord? Am I? Who's the Dark Lord? Is it somebody?
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the fuck are your parents? Who are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!
Okay. So let's consult the lore. The Dark Lord was challenged by the Father when he went out of control and began invading worlds. The Dark Lord was also created by the Father to rule a world that would become hell, and he sealed his essence in a life sphere. Now my theory is like how Vega is the physical embodiment of the Father, the Doomslayer is basically the physical embodiment of the Dark Lord. He has all his strength, but none of his evil. That makes sense? Good. The Slayer must fight the Dark Lord in ritualistic combat. If he wins, all demons would be forced back to hell. But if he loses, all of creation would be at the mercy of the Dark Lord. So, no pressure. No pressure at all. As I said, Doom's story has grown in complexity. It's no longer angry man shoots demon. Now there are so many more layers to this world. I have one problem with the story in this DLC, and that's its pacing. It moves way too fast. I'd love to spend time and just feel invested in what's been told to me, instead of being only invested in the set-piece moments. I understand that Doom is a fast-paced shooter, and story is pushed to the background. Now let's talk about what we all come to Doom for. It's this. Doom 2016 was just a dumb shooter that didn't evolve the genre in any meaningful way. But honestly, it didn't need to. But then, Doom Eternal came out and just blew everything out of the water. It set a new standard for how fast-paced shooters should be, Eternal turned a brainless shooter into something that can put your skills to the test. The first 3 missions are brutally hard because the game expects you to learn from your mistakes and learn from your failures. Eternal's first DLC was insane, as I said before, because it told the player, "Oh, you finished the main campaign, did you? Well, try this on for size, mother." Part 2 still has some of those insane encounters, but in some arenas, the DLC seems to run out of ideas and decides to just throw a wave of imps at you, or zombies, or a wave of zombies in a pool of liquid that slows you down. It feels like the kitchen sink mentality where they just throw anything at the wall to see what works. While the game is still fun and exhilarating, and the arcadey style that Eternal popularized is still fun, the game just at random points says, fuck it, throw them in a room with a bunch of explosive barrels everywhere. It makes the DLC feel half-assed, and also makes it feel like it's 2 separate experiences. On the one hand, we have the excellent encounters that test you on everything you know, and the other, we just have a power fantasy, and these experiences don't really work together. That's why Doom Eternal's main campaign made so much sense. It always gave you enough power to take on what's in front of you, but didn't make you feel like a literal god, and they took their time to craft these excellent combat encounters. Though I can kind of understand that they were under a time limit to do what they had to do in Part 2, because there's a lot of elements in Part 2 that don't seem like they were fully explored. For example, the dragon that suddenly appears, you don't ride it, it's just there for a cutscene and it's gone. And the levels move at a very brisk pace, unlike in the last DLC and the main campaign where the DLCs felt really long and expansive. But when Part 2 wants to bring the challenge, oh boy, does it ever. Part 2 brings in a new element called Escalation Encounters. These encounters are absolutely insane with the amount of demons they spawn and the combinations of demons they use. This is where the DLC is at its best, pushing you in a room with a bunch of powerful enemies and letting you cut loose. These are like the secret encounters from the main game, except when you finish it, you're given the option to up the difficulty in return for a cosmetic. Unfortunately, these cosmetics are nothing to really get excited about, and makes the fight you went through a complete waste of time. Another addition to the game is the use of grappling points with a shotgun that finally allow for more variation in traversal. There has been many other changes to Doom Eternal's parkour elements. Gone are the insane gauntlets of the first DLC and obstacle courses of the main game. In many ways the parkour has been streamlined, and I honestly don't know how to feel about that. I hated the complexity of the parkour sometimes. For achieving this simplicity, they took away the exhilaration of finishing a parkour section. It makes the DLC feel more like a collection of arenas instead of impressively designed maps. Honestly, the DLC isn't all that memorable except for some slight points in the narrative and some memorable encounters. Part 2 adds some new enemy types: the Riot Soldier, the Screamer, the Stone Imp, the Cursed Prowler, and the Armored Hellbear. The Screamer acts like a buff totem. If you hit them, they will make any demon around them stronger, creating an interesting obstacle to the encounter, and makes it even more important to choose your targets wisely. The Riot Soldier is a reskin of the Shield Soldier from the main game, except now their shields make them invincible from the front. They're fine, I guess, but they don't make me want to find new creative ways of dealing with them.
Moving at speed of sound, quickest hedgehog around.
Next we have, why it's that lovable blue blur, the demon with attitude, the Stone Imp. These lovable little guys love to make the Slayer's Day a nightmare. Unlike the other imps, these guys can take a lot of punishment and love to pin you into corners. Fortunately, the full auto shotgun puts them right in their place. Next we have the Armored Hellbear that takes a normal Baron and puts him in a near invincible suit of armor. The only way to destroy the armor is to either use a plasma rifle or shoot the mace when it glows green. They act like the Marauder, make them a threat that needs to be dealt with immediately, and even when you destroy the armor, you still have to deal with an incredibly pissed off Hellbear, unlike the Marauder who only gets stunned. But they don't use them in any creative ways. We have an encounter with 2 Marauders but never 2 armored Hellbarons. And finally, we have the Cursed Prowler, who acts like the normal Prowler, except this one can curse you, taking away your dashes, your lock-on, and draining your health. They're that kind of enemy that adds a little bit of fuck you into the mix. And I don't feel they work in the encounter because they come out of nowhere and there's no warning to when they actually come. But let's talk about the thing I really hate. The final boss. Now I left this bit unscripted because I didn't know what to say about this guy because the whole battle is a complete mess. For one, the fight goes on for way too long. It's like maybe 8 stages and it just keeps on dragging on and on. The fight is much the same as the first encounter with the Marauder, except this guy, if he hits you, he gains back all the health that you took off him. And he has a tendency to spawn ghost demons. Now some of them you can use to charge the new weapon, the hammer, but the others, they're just ghost demons like ghost tyrants. And there's no point in killing them because you're wasting ammo you could be using to kill the dogs, which he seems to spawn whenever he goddamn pleases. The main issues with the fight are the length, the Dark Lord's reach, which seems to be insanely far, and the fact that it's just another boss controlled by a gimmick. My favourite boss in all of Doom Eternal was the Gladiator, because it actually felt like a gladiator fight, and that's what this fight should have been. It should have been an evolution of the Gladiator fight. The new weapon added to this DLC is the Sledgehammer, that can turn any enemy into a literal loot pinata. This replaces the Crucible, and unlike the Crucible, I use this far more often as it's great for setting up combos and doing this. So the combat is still fun and enjoyable, but there is this lack of any meaningful challenge that deflates my enthusiasm.
The corrupted priests forbid the use of this beacon. If there are any remaining free tribes left.
Doom Eternal was like a painting. Ooh, I love the smooth texture of this one. I love the dramatic tone this tries to invoke. You all don't know true art. This is art. Doom Eternal is as beautiful as the first time I played it. The massive hulking structures of the Doom Hunter base, the atmosphere and the scale of the skyboxes, as well as the devastation that hell brought to Earth. Ancient Gods continued that with even more beautiful locations like the Temple of the World Spire, which is gorgeous. This giant structure that's full of these beautiful blue and orange crystals littering the interior. Or how about the city of Verdun, this futuristic hell city that is the center of the final confrontation between the Slayer and the Dark Lord. Or how about reclaimed Earth? After hell was defeated, nature returned as plants began to grow from the decayed forms of hell, bringing new life to this world. And finally, we have the music. So with Mick Gordon cutting ties with it after Doom Eternal's release, it is up to 2 new composers, Andrew Hulshalt and David Levy. From composers trying to match the level of sheer complexity of Mick Gordon, these 2 composers do a fantastic job, capturing the same feel that Mick Gordon popularized, but still find a way to put their own spin on things. Mick was more about dragging you down to the literal pits of hell, using panning expertly to make it that much more chaotic. He was a perfectionist, and that shows, while Andrew and David are more about keeping the momentum in the fight and having beats that hit that much harder and consistent. I have one issue with the music though. When everything is going, the music tends to bleed to the background to the point where I can hardly notice it at all. It's like the music wasn't properly mixed when everything is firing at all cylinders. So Ancient Gods Part 2 is still a fantastic DLC, although it wasn't the epic conclusion I was expecting for the series. And that's fine. I don't think the last DLC had to do that. I don't think any DLC needs to do that. But my mind keeps wondering, did COVID impact both of these DLCs, and would they have been much bigger in scale if COVID had never happened? Would we have been able to drive that mech suit? Would we have been able to fly that actual dragon? But anyway, thanks for watching.